Hi, Roy here on my, on my channel, Roy Reads Anything. And this is a thank you video to thank you for getting me to over 600 subscribers, which is an amazing number. So delighted that so many people want to see more and more of this kind of thing, whatever this kind of thing is. Um, it's I don't do many of the recommended things for making a successful booktube channel. Um, some maybe, but lots I basically just don't. So I'm delighted that there are people to talk to, and that there are comments and regular people who come back. For me, this is kind of about where I'd want it all to get to, really. I don't think I'd want the accountability or the occasional hassles that would come with like having multiple thousands of subscribers. Yes, this is good. And what I said I'd do is answer some questions. So this is your reward. So some subscribers have asked me some questions, which I'm now going to attempt to answer. And if the subscribers have got channels, I will link them down below. So from Thomas, Art and Lit Matters, asks me this. Well, he asks the question in the form of a kind of a role play scenario. So you stumble on an unexpected estate sale, and seeing no books at all, ask the seller. She says there is a books of box in the corner and she doesn't think anyone would want. The book on top makes your heart race. It's getting quite unlikely, this. I take many tablets designed to stop my heart from racing. My heart moves with the speed of an alligator basking in the mud. Beats quite fast on bank holidays, but Christmas. Trying to remain calm. You make an offer on the whole box, sight unseen. The seller is delighted to accept your offer. Exploring the contents at home, you are amazed to find a mixture of books, comics, pulps, and magazines you have craved much of your life. Tell us in detail about the contents. Okay, so I think with that, obviously it's great to find rare or valuable items, but I wouldn't necessarily want to find spectacularly rare things that would be so valuable I'd basically have to sell them. If I found something like that issue of the Incredible Hulk that has the first appearance of Wolverine, you know, I I wouldn't keep it. I couldn't enjoy reading it. Have to go through all the process of trying to get as much money for it as possible. So that's a rubbish fantasy. So it's somewhere in the middle, I suppose, between like things I don't want and stuff it's really hard to find. So few examples book wise. I would love to stumble across Dracula's Daughter novelization. So there was a series in, I think, the early 80s of novelizations of Universal horror movies, and Dracula's Daughter is one of them. I've actually got some of these, but that's not one I've managed to find. There are some for sale, but for ridiculous prices, many hundreds of pounds. That's not going to happen. Some of them were novelised by Ramsey Campbell. Not sure if this is one of them, but Dracula's Daughter, which was the first Universal sequel to the Bela Lugosi Dracula movie. I really love that as a film. It's kind of bonkers. There's Dracula is barely in it, apart from being burned at the beginning. The Dracula's daughter, she wants to live a more normal human life. She lives in Bloomsbury, and so if this was real, she'd be hanging out with people like Virginia Woolf and Dorothy L. Sayers, which would be fantastic. And it's got a kind of a screwball comedy subplot. It's just the best movie ever. So yes, if I found Dracula's Daughter, not for like £400, that would be good. Comics wise, I always regret getting rid of my Atlas comics. So in the 70s, there was a comics publisher called Atlas, and what they tried to do was to bring out, to kind of replicate Marvel and DC and have every genre of comic there is. So there was plenty of superheroes, there was some barbarians, there was crime, there was horror, um, and a lot of us like bought them all because it's like, wow, we get it on the ground floor, we'll have all these first issues, and this will, these will go on for decades. And I think none of them lasted more than 4 issues, mostly like 2 or 3. And I had nearly all of them. Like a lot of people, I made the fatal mistake of not buying Vicky, which was a teenage comedy strip. Um, and in any case, I got rid of them all. And then for a long time, they were just bargain bin, valueless comics. I could have re-bought them, and now, because lots of people feel sentimental about them, they've become valuable again. And it would be prohibitive to acquire them. So if I could get a bunch of Atlas comics, that would be great. As for a pulp, I would really like, as a fan of the character Doc Savage, I'd like to own a Doc Savage magazine from the 30s in really good condition. And magazine-wise, well, I'm always going on about early occult detectives. So any of those Victorian or early 20th century magazines that have some of the serials of occult detectives in them, like the Idler, in which Carnacki the Ghost Finder appeared. So those are the kind of things, that would thrill me in this scenario. Okay, the Born Again reader asks, what's a book, if any, that has made you cry? What about one that made you laugh a lot? Made me cry. I was pretty choked up by Remains of the Day, Kazuo Ishiguro. One that's maybe a bit more of interest to people here. Philip K. Dick's A Scanner Darkly is a great novel, and it's very much based in his real experiences of being on the kind of drugs scene in San Francisco. It is a science fiction novel, and I think there's sort of, I just found it very moving. I think it's towards the end he sort of acknowledges like some of the real people whose lives had come and gone in that kind of world. What about one that made you laugh? I think recently Sean Bithel's Confessions of a Bookseller, found that pretty amusing. Was I laughing a lot? Not sure. One time a bunch of us were going to the Lake District, and in the back of my friend's car, where a couple of us were riding because he was giving us the lift, found one of Louise Rennison's books. I think they're aimed at like teenage girls, and we started reading that, and that was hilarious. Yeah, I'm going to put The Works of Louise Rennison, R.I.P. Now, who's asking this? I'm losing track now of who the questions are coming from. Well, are all these from the Born Again reader, perhaps? Did you, or do you, outside of BookTube, have a group of buddies who also read comics you could geek out with? Yes, but not really for a long time. Growing up, the street I lived in was sometimes attacked by boys from the neighbouring street. So we'd have these battles, throwing sort of rowan berries at each other and stuff like that.
The way you do.
Because there were rowan trees in the street. Otherwise, where would the rowan berries have come from? Anyway, one day met up with them outside Vortex Books, which was a science fiction bookshop and comics bookshop in Brighton, and I realised we had this thing in common. So hostilities were ceased as we bonded around our joint hobby. One of those guys now works in a comic shop in Brighton. That's really good. For a random one, what's your ideal vacation? Is it a lodge full of James Patterson books? It is not. Uh, but it probably would be, ideal vacation probably would be a cottage in Scotland, specifically the Black Isle, I think. Okay, another question from Indie ATM. Can we get more reviews of Silver Age comics? Yes, we can. They're sitting here waiting to be reviewed, so coming soon. Although, due to lack of imagination, they're all issues of Superman family. So it's be careful what you wish for. Nettie Digging Books asks or states, I'm a firm believer that the roads we travel lead us to experiences and open doors which shape our lives. What roads travelled have led you to like the things you like, e.g. books, comics and music? Well, that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure. To me, it feels less about travelling as in like going on a quest to find things and more about sort of where you find yourself. So I found myself in a house that was full of books, you know, I mean, when I'm like a little kid, because my parents had books, there were books everywhere. So that was interesting. You know, what are these colourful objects? What are they? And then obviously learning to read them and enjoying them, stuff like that. So I guess I was lucky that books were around, and just the kind of things my parents were interested in. I think my mum, growing up, she had had things like Arabian Nights and novels of Walter Scott and things like that. And my dad quite liked some science fiction and some ghost stories. So just picked up some threads from there, really. And then it's about being at the time when comics appeared. You know, I suppose the culture gave me things that I just took. So yeah, the metaphor of the road travelled doesn't quite feel like that. It more feels like you you absorb things from the times you find yourself in. You know, music wise, I've said before, grew up in the sort of punk rock era, so had that experience of like a new kind of music coming along and being really exciting and being able to go to go to stuff that was happening, just being alive at a time when there was popular music and it was affordable. um, sorry, bit of an incoherent answer to that. um, MJ reading this life asks, number one, when are you going to come on my channel for an interview? When you invite me to. I'll get your people to talk to my people, and we'll sort something out.
Has just invited you.
What?
Well, in that question.
Oh, I see. Yeah, but I can't just show up, can I? We've got to
No, that's true.
decide when it's going to be.
Yeah. Got you.
Number two, what is a book that you recommend to others over and over and over again? Well, I haven't done that for a long time, but there used to be a book which you'd find secondhand quite a lot, and I used to buy multiple copies and give them to people. And the answer is Anybody Can Do Anything by Betty Macdonald. I'll say that again. Anybody Can Do Anything by Betty Macdonald, which it's not a self-help book. It's an autobiography set in Depression era America. So Betty Macdonald, I think, used to be pretty well known. Her best known book that was also made into a film is The Egg and I, where it's her and her husband being self-reliant and trying to live out on this farm. And then in this follow-up book, she's divorced that guy, and now she's got her kids, and she's going back to the city, and it's like how they live in those times. A lot of it is funny. There's one scene that is utterly terrifying, one of the most frightening things I've ever read in a book, and just generally really interesting. It is enheartening, but not in a sappy way. And her other books are good too. Um, Onions in the Stew, I think that's another one about living out in the country. The Plague and I is her TB hospital one. So yes, Betty Macdonald due for a revival. Okay, Randy L. Ray, the literate Texan, asks. I won't try and imitate his voice.
Please don't.
How did you learn about BookTube, and how long after learning about BookTube did you start making videos? Yeah, okay. I was looking for a way to do something about my yard of random books, which is a set of books I bought. They're like shabby decor, random books, and I was going to read them all as a project. I thought I don't just want to put this on Facebook or whatever. There must be some other way. So sort of looking to see, well, what do people do about books on YouTube, and found BookTube stuff, and then probably the same type of trajectory lots of people talk about, where you see some of the big BookTube channels and think, well, that looks good. Not for me, but it's young people talking a lot about fantasy and YA. Great. But then digging a bit deeper and finding channels that were kind of more my kind of thing, and beginning to think maybe I could do that. And then, yeah, eventually taking the plunge. Again, like a lot of people, I made the mistake early on of trying to, thinking the video has to be perfect and you've got to say everything there is to say about the topic and stuff like that. I probably had 3 or 4 goes before I made a video that I put up. So that's how that came around, really. S Griffin 9 says, when and how did you meet your wife? When would be early 1990s? 1989. Sounds about right. And how? She jumped out from behind a pillar.
It's true.
Adopted a stance with her hands on her hips and said the deathless lines, I'm a superhero and this is my superhero stance. That answers that one. The middle place asks, what's with all the random Freebie and the Bean references? Okay, so one time, I was talking about a book. I think the title was The Vampire and the Lady. I haven't read this book yet. I think it's one of the Phantom series. So I was just reading out the titles, The Vampire and the Lady, and as a random bit of stream and consciousness said Freebie and the Bean, because it's another, the something and the something else. I don't think I've ever seen Freebie and the Bean. So as for what's with the references, we're comparing, it's something to do with a book I haven't read yet and a film I haven't seen. So the connection between them remains obscure to myself and all the advanced scholars of the age. But no doubt that will become clearer. And finally, from Aaron Hook asks, what has been the most explosive reaction from Dr. Jenny to a book you have read? Well, should point out that Dr. Jenny's interjections are what she would call benign heckling. So she's not excoriating me, or if she's laughing, it's laughing with me.
If I'm laughing, it's because I found it funny.
Yeah, and yeah, obviously talking about vintage books, we're sometimes delving into material that might have attitudes and views that we might not share ourselves. And it is kind of interesting that, it's like, how do you have to, you sort of, sometimes you kind of read in a two-headed kind of way, because you're kind of enjoying the story in its own terms, but and you're also learning the point of view of people at the time, but without necessarily sharing that point of view. So yeah, we might be between us, kind of unpacking some of that material and finding it amusing. But I don't sit here and think, let's find a book that will really provoke Dr. Jenny to paroxysms of feminist wrath. Next week, E. Hoffman Price's The Devil Wives of Li Fong. That is all the questions. So thanks again for subscribing. Probably got rid of the subscribers now, getting it down to a more manageable 500. And we will be back soon with other things, including the Devil Wives of Lee Fong. Okay, bye then.